Hey everybody, it's Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. For all things Vespa, check us out on the web, Scooter West. So today I'm going to talk about the most mundane item on your modern automatic four-stroke Vespa. Oil filter. Everybody knows if it's got an internal combustion engine, you probably all assume it's got an oil filter in it. Well, pretty much with the Vespa series, I'm speaking of the modern Vespas that are four-stroke engines, which pretty much you pour the oil into the crankcase and not into a separate oil tank. Anything that's 125cc and larger on both Vespa and Piaggio has an oil filter on it. And its job, I'm sure you could find plenty of definitions of oil filter on Wikipedia or another YouTube channel. Well, the oil circulated throughout the engine, particles of carbon, metal, other materials, they're picked up by this filter by a fine paper mesh that's inside this filter. So today I'm going to go over the 4 different variations of the filter that's specific for the Vespa 125, 150, all the way to the 300, which is this size filter. And we sell 3 different variations of it, but there's also one variation that comes with the scooter, and I'll talk about it. And later in this video, I'll have some excitement. I'm going to cut some of these filters open and show you the difference in the construction of these filters and what makes them different. So before I get on to the most common oil filter found on the Vespas and Piaggios, let me get to the oddballs. Well, there are larger or different filters that are used on the 350cc engine along with the 400 and 500cc motor that's found on an MP3 or a Beverly BB 500. So if you have the 400 or 500cc engine, which is commonly referred to as the master engine, it runs this much larger oil filter, similar size to a very small car filter. Part number on this replacement filter is 82658R, so pretty much all the 400s and 500 engines all the way back to about 2005 have been using the same oil filter all the way up to current, the 2020 MP3 500 Sport. So in order to remove this, you can see there's kind of flats throughout the filter. I'd highly recommend getting Tool OF03, and this is the specific Bizzetti tool that engages with the filter, so you're able to loosen it. You could improvise with a channel locks, but I'll warn you, these casings of these filters are pretty thin, so when you install it, you're going to scrape away the paint possibly, so the filter could rust, or you could actually even kink it and it may rupture. And I've seen filters leak at little kinks such as this. This is a used filter, it probably was removed with a channel lock, but it's this larger filter for the 400, 500 motors. And on to the other oddball. The BV 350 or Beverly 350, also the Yorban 350 MP3, X8, not sold here in North America, but just the BV 350. They commonly use oil filter that's they call a cartridge oil filter. Let me show you this. Part number for this oil filter is A80887, and it's located behind a cavity or little aluminum door that's held by usually 3 screws on the BV350, and in some cases even a threaded cap. So essentially this is what's inside a filter like this. It's just the cartridge. And the reason many manufacturers use a cartridge is it's less waste. It is a little messier to change, and I think it's cheaper to manufacture because it's just the internal cartridge. So you can see the paper pleats. So pretty much all oil filters are based on these paper pleat design. Sometimes they have a pressure relief valve in it. BV350 filter doesn't have that. And then they got a seal on the inside. So the dirty oil goes in from the outside. The clean oil comes through this inner. It's very important that you orient this correctly when you install it. Some filters is possible to put in incorrectly, and that could cause severe damage to the motor because it may clog up the oil passage. So a little trickier to change than a spin-on cartridge filter. But that's what's used on the Piaggio BV350. No specific tools to change it. They do have an O-ring on the cover as well. You can look at my other videos on how to change the oil or do any of the services on the BV350, and where I cover this filter design. So on to the most common filter found on Vespa and Piaggio scooters. Pretty much all the engines, 4-stroke, 125 all the way to 300 in the modern era. Some of the very early 125 motors used a different filter. I'm not going to talk about that. Never sold here in North America. So for the last several years, the oil filter that's included with the motor on the scooter, they don't sell this as a spare replacement part. It's just used internally at Piaggio. You can see it's similar to the 500 filter, and it's got flats on the edge. There's no means of removing it from the outer casing. So this filter is just the original equipment filter. I've seen them made by many different companies. This one happens to be made by Mahle, which is a common oil filter manufacturer. But this is what's typically included on most Vespas. So when you do your first oil change, this filter is removed. And a lot of times I'll look at a scooter that comes in, I can just look at that filter, I know if they've done a first service. Not sold by Scooter West or any of the Piaggio dealers, not available as a spare part. But moving on to the most common filter. This is the original equipment Piaggio filter, replacement filter. Part number A2635-PA is our specific part number. It's got this flat in the casing here on the outside. Again, it's made by many different companies over the years. Typically they have this round O-ring that seals up a little easier, is what I find. So in order to install this correctly, I highly recommend having an oil filter tool, such as this T-handle tool. And our part number is Tool OF4. So Tool OF4, all put together. You can search for it on scooterwest.com, and it engages with a slot. It's not very effective for removing these filters. I suggest the best way to remove them is just with a set of channel locks, or just some type of wrench to grasp the outside of it. Typically that will damage the filter. You don't want to do that on installation. The next filter we have is not the original Piaggio filter, but I've checked out many aftermarket filters, and I've come to the conclusion this is the best quality aftermarket filter you can buy. Very easy to use. This is the firepower filter. The Scooter West part number is 483727. And the nice thing about this filter is it uses a standard 17mm wrench to take off. There's other filters out there on the market. Most of them have a 21mm hex on the outside, and that's a very odd size. And in my experiences, this is stamped out of too thin of metal on many of those other brand filters. And you go to tighten it or loosen it, you end up breaking off the nut or distorting the nut, and it defies the whole idea of having this nut. This filter specifically has a very strong, thicker steel nut with many spot welds that hold it to the casing of the filter. And for your race nuts, it does have a hole drilled out on it for safety wire. This filter also has the square O-ring style. Takes a little bit more torque to seat these, but they tend to seal a little bit better. So the last filter we have, it's the most expensive replacement filter. A very popular option. We sell quite a few of them every year. Later in this video, I'm going to cut it open and see if there's anything different inside that makes it magic. This is the Malossi Red Chili Oil Filter. A lot of people like it because it's red. Part number is M0313382. You can look in the description of this video for all these part numbers. Built very similar to the original filter. It's slightly longer, which is not a problem. So I suspect it has a longer filter cartridge inside. We'll cut it open and see what's so special about it. And just like the premium aftermarket filter, it also has a lubricated square O-ring. So the nice thing is most of these filters, they have a pre-lubricated O-ring. If it has a dry O-ring on it or seal, I would recommend taking oil, the fresh oil, and lubricating the ring before you install it. There's a lot of debate on if you should fill up an oil filter with oil or not. It's such a short amount of time with the high volume fuel, the oil pumps on the Vespas. I've done it both ways, but it really doesn't matter. And the last thing with the Molosi filter, it does have a nice slotted engagement for using the tool OF4 to install it. And I find this is built a little bit better than the original filter. It's just a little bit more squared off so you can get better grip. But I always recommend pushing in to the filter as you're tightening it. So here's the fun part of the video. This is what I'm looking forward to. I'm gonna go ahead and cut all these filters open. I've cut several filters open in the past just to see how they're constructed. So let's get right to it and see what's inside these filters. All right, I had all my fun with destroying stuff, so let's start with the original filter. It comes with the scooter when it's brand new that you can't purchase. So you see it's got a cover that has the threaded insert. There's usually a rubber seal. And then you got the oil filter element, which isn't much different than that cartridge that's found on the BV or Beverly 350. You can see it's just got pleated filters on there, and then in the bottom there's some remains of the oil and a spring that holds it in place. But that's pretty much in the original filter that would come on the scooter. There's no pressure relief valve in the filter, but this little diaphragm right here sometimes operates as a pressure relief valve. So the original filter, set that aside. Let's move on to the replacement Piaggio filter. So very similar construction. It's got the rubber O-ring and a cartridge that comes out. And it's a little bit shorter. Built pretty much the same though. The pleats are much tighter in this filter. And it also has a spring in there. So moving on to the premium aftermarket replacement filter. So pretty much built in a similar way to all the other filters. And it's got a silicone rubber pressure relief and gasket right here, or actually, I'm mistaken. That's actually a one-way valve is what that is. It's a one-way valve flapper. So the oil can only go in, and when the motor stops, that actually closes off these outer holes. So the pressure relief valve is actually located in here. It's a spring-loaded valve, and it's found in all the filter designs. And the only reason that would open is if you have a severely clogged filter. It's more important that you get oil circulation than allowing the motor to fail because of lack of oil. So that's the whole idea. That the hope is that never gets triggered, you know, that pressure relief valve, which actually bypasses the element of the filter. And moving on to the last filter, the Molosi. So let's see, this filter is a premium in price over all the other filter designs. Similar one-way valve, but it's made out of the black rubber. And you pull the cartridge out. And indeed, the whole case is a little bit longer, and the cartridge is slightly longer than the premium filter. So you could see the different sizes of cartridges, the replacement, and the OEM filter that comes on the motor. Actually, the OEM filter that comes on the motor is a little smaller in diameter. But one thing about the replacement filter is it's got a tighter pleat. So, you know, if I really wanted to get technical with this, I could cut these filters all the way open and unfold the paper pleats and see the surface area that you'd find. But I think that might be going more into it than I need to. So regardless of the size of the filter element, they are typically all going to last the life of the oil, which is typically 6,000 miles, 10,000 kilometers. I recommend if you use the scooter pretty hard or hop on the freeways here, I recommend changing the oil every 3,000 miles. And you can watch all my service videos that kind of outline the specifics of the oil change intervals. So I'll show you the pleated filter paper material. It's much like the same material that would be in a thick coffee filter. And I'm sure there's slightly different compositions of the filter material between the two, or all four of these filters. I don't know much about the science of the material. I'm sure there's certain microns of material they do allow the pass, you know, and they're all going to be within the original specification of the original equipment filter. But the filter pleats, you pretty much, let's see if I can get this out, just to show you the inner core of the filter. So this is the filter paper, and it pretty much pulls out, and you can see the steel core on the inside of the filter. And they're all constructed in the same fashion if I cut the filter paper out of any of these. So the last thing I'm going to speak about is the actual casings of the filter. This is the Mahle original equipment filter. It comes on a motor, so I could squeeze it, distort it. The Piaggio replacement filter, squeeze it, distort it. The premium aftermarket filter, I found this has a very, very strong casing. I can't distort it too well. And the Malossi one, it's stronger than the original filter, Piaggio filter, but not as strong as the premium aftermarket filter that we have. Not really an issue. There's typically no reason for these to ever burst. They don't ever get to that pressure where they will burst. Every once in a great while, I will see them leak from the seams prematurely, you know, where it's crimped onto the casing, this front nose of the filter. But just want to chime in the different constructions. This may be important if you're in some area where there's a lot of rust on the road. If you abrade this, it is possible to rust through an oil filter casing and have an oil leak from the casing. But having the thicker casing also makes it easier to install and remove, because the filter doesn't collapse when you're removing an over-tightened filter. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. So I'm finished with my science experiment with the Vespa oil filter. I hope you found that pretty interesting. There's a lot more than what they look like. You see, they all look pretty close to the same appearance on the outside. Thanks for watching. This is Robot here from Scooter West and Vespa Motorsport here in San Diego. If you're going to do your own services, consider buying the parts from scooterwest.com. Free shipping, typically on orders over $100. We have many service packages that include all the parts to do many of the mileage-based services on your Vespa or Piaggio scooter on our website, and they're at a discounted price. So it helps you out if you're going to tackle your own service. And if you stumble across this video for the first time, of course, our channel Vespa Motorsport mostly specializes in doing all the different services yourself on your Vespa or Piaggio. And we are also a Vespa dealer. I highly recommend that you support your local Vespa dealer as well as helping us out. You know, your dealership may be there to help you out if you do not want to tackle your own service, especially complicated services, maybe where you want to do the belt job or the valve adjustment, or maybe there's a fault with a scooter, especially a modern fuel injected scooter. That's where, unfortunately, dealer-only tools would be very helpful. Even a lot of carbureted scooters, I see a lot of people kind of get in a dead end where they don't assemble something correctly in a carburetor, it just doesn't run right, and they're down a dead end. It's nice to have the experience of a dealer to help you out in such case. Thanks again for watching. This is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com.